Today on CityCast Chicago, why are ICE raids sparking protests across the city? Is the long-promised 78 development finally coming to life in the South Loop? And where does Chicago rank amongst feel-good summer cities? It's Tuesday, June 10th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. I'm joined by executive producer Simone Alicea. Morning, my friend. How was your weekend?
Good morning. It was okay. I had a somewhat chilly beach day because...
Come on, got out to the beach?
Well, hope springs, ever eternal. But I am hoping that later this summer we have like a real beach day where it's like really warm and I can actually go out into the lake and go swimming. But it was nice. It was nice to be outside, hang with friends. What about you?
That's what's up. I had a good weekend overall. I spent a little bit of time outside. I went to the Oak Park Pride Fest on Saturday. My homie Arts and Nats was out there. She does these really like dope collages that she can build for you for whatever event, or she has these collage kits. So I got a couple for my niece, which was nice. And then I watched a lot of tennis this weekend. I watched the entire Coco Golf final on Saturday morning. I watched the entire Sinner and Alcaraz final. That might have been one of the 3 best tennis matches I have ever seen in my life. 5.5 hours of nonstop intensity to follow up the fantastic Coco Golf win the day earlier. Yeah, that was great. I don't know. It's the weather for pickleball is coming back up. So I don't know. I've been focusing more on racket sports overall. I think this might be my first week of playing. I don't know. This was the first time in a while that I was really tuned into one of the Grand Slams, and it paid off because both of those were fantastic matches. One story we did not get to last week, but it feels like it only got bigger and bigger over the weekend, was all of the protests across the country that have sparked in opposition to the Trump administration's latest round of cruel and unconstitutional immigration operations and arrests. Chicago and the surrounding boroughs have been dealing with these raids since the administration came into power back in January and made true on their promises of putting our city directly in their crosshairs. And then last Wednesday, things picked back up as community activists and city leaders clashed with immigration officers carrying out a very cruel operation in the South Loop last Wednesday. Simone, let's kind of talk through what happened last week.
So what happened is there are these immigrants who are part of this program, this sort of where they are being like on monitoring, right? In lieu of detention, they are on this kind of monitoring program, and they are required to check in occasionally in person as part of this. So from what all the reports said is a bunch of these people received alerts that, hey, you need to come check in for one of these appointments.
This was not scheduled. This was sort of last minute. They were getting messages earlier that week, I think Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. What
happened is they get there and there are ICE agents, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, there to make arrests for the purposes of detention. So, right, the whole purpose of the program is to help avoid detention.
Mm-hmm. While you wait for work permit, while you wait for asylum court dates.
As you're working your way through the system.
Exactly. It's a program that allows you to sort of set roots. You are being monitored by the sort of federal government, law enforcement officials. But then for them to essentially use your vulnerability, use this program to lure you essentially to the building so that ICE can make arrests.
Well, the trick is you put them in a catch-22, right? You say if you don't come, you'll be arrested because you violated a condition of your program. Or if you do come, you'll be arrested because we're here and we're going to pick you up. As this was unfolding, advocate groups, people started to hear about this, various advocate groups around Chicago, activist groups. And so then they began to show up to protest these arrests. And then that's where you started to see clashes between immigration officers and protesters. Among those protesters, several alder folks. And, the pictures from the coverage is wild because you see these federal immigration officers, they don't look like police officers. They don't look like law enforcement.
No, they often come in either plainclothed or they come in with these like tactical vests on. They come on fully masked up as to not get their face or their identity seen, right? They don't have to interface with the crowds in the same way as like if you're at a protest and like CPD is out there, you can say, give me your badge number. You can identify them in a way that like the ICE and federal agents are completely evading.
Yeah, it is. It really does not look like this is a law enforcement action. It really looks like extra military.
Looks like these people are being kidnapped.
Right. Like it really, just appearance wise, just looking at the photos, one of the alders said that they were shoved to the ground by an ICE agent. Chicago police shows up. What we know is that there were somewhere between 10 to 20 potentially immigrants who were detained by federal immigration enforcement officials. CPD says that they did not participate in that actual enforcement action. They also didn't make any arrests. But it's interesting because you have a lot of advocates and the alders who were there calling for a hearing, a city council hearing into the actions of Chicago police and to what degree there was a real sense that because of the police's presence, that ICE's actions were then aided by that. That part of this is a really tough situation because like the city basically has one tool for addressing a large gathering that's getting out of hand, which is what this was, right? They have the Chicago police. However, the police are not going to, forcibly stop another law enforcement agency from taking action. That's just not going to happen. And so even when you have CPD who is sort of there or just trying to induce some kind of crowd control, the people who kind of end up feeling the brunt of those actions are the protesters and the people who were already in confrontation with federal authorities. And so there's sort of questions around like, was CPD following the city's welcoming city ordinance? The welcoming city ordinance only says that, police will not actively aid immigration enforcement. That's not really their role. They're not there to arrest immigrants. They're not there to arrest people who are in the country without authorization. However, a situation like this, I think that line gets a lot blurrier.
Even as Governor Pritzker, Mary Brandon Johnson have sort of leaned in on this ordinance to say, oh, they cannot participate. I think these protests kind of show why, in some ways, that at a certain point, like that ordinance is just that, on paper and hollow. Because even if you do not participate, you can't stop them. You can't get in their way. The most you can do, it seems, is get in our way of protesting, regardless of if they are not on the ground helping ICE detain people. It goes to show how much benefit is that on paper to us when they do start arresting students, when they start holding people at the airport, right? When they do this sort of mousetrap type policy to round people up around the country, it shows that, these sort of welcoming city ordinances, particularly how they do or don't govern law enforcement to participate, at the end of the day is only going to go so far.
It's really alarming, I think, to see, like I said, I think the images from this particular encounter were really alarming. We're starting to see protests pick up, not just, obviously, you mentioned in LA where the National Guard was deployed, but, seeing protests this week here in Chicago and expecting to see more as well. It is a really alarming time, I think, right now.
Everyday Chicagoans, whether they were connected to those people or not, being like, hold on, something messed up is happening here. We've seen numerous videos of people who weren't even the subject of an operation being pulled out. We've heard testimony of people being stopped and over questioned at the airport. The travel ban that just went into effect. You had students who got calls from their university. They're like, hey, you need to hurry up and come back now. And so it is very clear that the Trump administration, these federal immigration officers, like you said, they have no desire to go by the rule of law. They plan on carrying out these operations as swiftly, as cruel, with as much chaos, intimidation, and fear as possible. There is a planned demonstration at Federal Plaza today where a number of advocacy organizations across Chicago will stand united in opposition to the Trump administration, to ICE, and these ongoing operations. I will drop a link in the show notes so you can learn more. We have spent a lot of time, not only the last couple of months, but over the last few years, really trying to get a sense of how Chicago sports team impact broader conversations of mega developments, because it seems if you look across Chicago sports team, every single one is jostling for bigger practice facilities, bigger stadiums, more public funding, and in some cases, a lot of Chicago sports fans feel held hostage by these billionaires and these billion-dollar teams. And so last week, when the owner of the Chicago Fire came out and said that he also wants a new stadium, I think a lot of people were shocked when we found out that he was planning to put up a large chunk, if not a majority, of the money for a new Chicago Fire stadium at the 78. Simone, you know, it feels like he's in a much better position than his colleagues over at the Bears, the White Sox.
Yes, this is a proposal that will be leaves a much better taste in the mouths of Chicagoans, I'll say. So we're talking about Joe Mansueto, who is the owner of the Chicago Fire, the billionaire owner. He started Morningstar, which is a financial firm, but he's a local guy. And, he said, yeah, we're going to privately finance the stadium itself. We want to do it at the 78. They released this cute little video. I don't know if people saw. And this seems to be really actually happening, which is shocking for both, I think, the Fire and for the developers of the 78. As folks may remember, the 78 was also floated as a potential new home for the White Sox. It's so far, no one is saying yet that plan is like totally not going to happen. Although I think the
Alder Paddow, yeah, she gave a little bit of concern to say that plot is not big enough for two.
The soccer stadium would be 22,000 people. Baseball stadium would be much, much larger. But yeah, it's a little unclear kind of what the future of that particular proposal is, especially now that, Jerry Reinsdorf has made a deal with Justin Ishbia for a big investment and a potential sale of the White Sox, maybe.
That's one of the current minority owners of the White Sox, setting up a potential financial agreement to slowly purchase more and more controlling stake in the White Sox. Because right now, no one outside of the Reinsdorf conglomerate has any say in what happens on, like, anything to say with what happens in the clubhouse, roster moves, like, to improve. And so this feels like, at least in that story, I don't know, it feels like it's trying to both assuage longtime fans who have been calling for Reinsdorf to sell the team, but also it feels like it plays into Reinsdorf's larger plan to sort of gaslight us into giving them more money for a stadium, being like, hey, maybe it's better with the devil you know than the devil you don't. But I think what Mansueto is trying to do here is at least to position himself in the Fire in the eyes of fans as an alternative to this, like, conversation around spending millions and millions and millions of tax dollars on stadiums. I think he's also trying to, like, speed up this process by maybe gaining favor with the city and the state that would maybe allow them to get shovels in the dirt by the end of the year, start of next year.
Well, and the Fire don't have their own stadium currently. That's the other sort of big part, right? From the actual team side of things, right? They currently play games at Soldier Field. I think, it's worth noting that there will be, assuming this project moves forward, and there are a couple approvals that need to happen, but there will be some public funds going to infrastructure. There was a TIF district that was already created for the 78 when this project was kind of first getting underway. So a lot of that stuff was kind of already expected. There were gonna have to be infrastructure improvements no matter what went on that site. And as folks may remember, there were a lot of potential things that could have been at the 78. The White Sox Stadium we mentioned. There was a U of I project, a Discovery project that's now going to be at the Quantum campus.
Floated as a potential spot for the casino.
But yeah, they didn't win the casino bid. which is interesting because I actually think that probably would have been a pretty good location in hindsight.
One of the things Mansueto wants is not only a permanent home, but I think similar to the Bears, similar to the White Sox, they want a piece of land that they have more control over, that they can extract more revenue from year round. And I think that part of the conversation definitely slows things down, because I think we still question, is that area built for it? And then also, when the Fire put up their now open practice facility up at Belmont Cragen, people in the neighborhood pushed back and was like, is this what we need to be using with these open swaths of land, whether it's Lincoln Yards or the 78? Should this be a site for affordable housing? Should this be a site for a community center? Should this be something for the near South Side beyond $100 million sports facility? And so I think, while on one hand, the idea of this being largely funded privately may bode well for fans of the Fire, for the city stakeholders and state stakeholders, I do think it still begs the question from people in the neighborhood and beyond, like, is this the appropriate way to be using land in the city?
Although I think you run into that less at this particular location than you would at Lincoln Yards than you did with the practice facility, which of course was also purchased from the Chicago Housing Authority, right? Like that had its own sort of can of worms that went with that. Something at the Michael Reese site in Bronzeville, I think that would also be a different question. This parcel of land, like we said, is in South Loop. It's very close to sort of the commercial center of the city. So I think maybe not as pressing or as vocal a concern as we might have seen in some of these other things. To your point about like creating this, right? Everybody wants their own Gallagher way, right? The Ricketts did it up in Wrigleyville and, created this.
It's the modern way of building new ballparks, new stadiums. Like, if it's not tied to an entertainment district, it isn't talked about or looked at in the same way when you start talking nationally about the attractiveness of a given stadium. And so,
which is so interesting to me in a city like Chicago. Like, I kind of understand this in some cities where stadiums are being built in corridors that are potentially underdeveloped. If you think about Sox Park, for example, in Bridgeport, like, yes, you don't have sort of the 4 sports bars kind of right on campus, along with family friendly stuff that they're doing, outside of game day. And you don't quite have that. But Bridgeport's a pretty vibrant community and there's a lot going on there. I'm thinking about the graph of our sports teams and on their way to getting a new home. And I think the Fire have just shot out ahead. And, you've got the Bears who are in their little Arlington Heights holding pattern. And then you've got the Sox kind of way behind who are like, are we going to do something?
And again, the Bulls and the Blackhawks, comfortable in their home, but are trying to. But again, if we're thinking about closest to sort of a Gallagher way, I think it'd go Fire, then Bulls and Blackhawks, because they're already starting the process of buying up the parking lots.
The 1901 projects. Mm-hmm.
Right. This sort of $7 billion, decades-long project to really build up the surrounding area around the United Center. I'm not saying that to say it is currently depraved or something. People live there. It is a neighborhood, but essentially to buy up the parking lots to transform it into the type of entertainment district that you see up in Wrigley, which again, some people, I don't know. Is that really what you want?
I mean, the people who are making money off of it certainly like it.
They happy for sure. If you want to learn more about this $650 million proposal, please head to our show notes. Last week in our Hey Chicago newsletter, we talked about this recent ranking of feel-good summer cities. Simone, one, what was the methodology of this ranking and where did Chicago fall? Because when we're talking about best place to be in the summer, I don't think that there is nothing above Chicago. So I'm interested to see who put this together, how they put it together, and what were their results.
So let's start with our ranking. We ranked on this list number 3, behind New York at number 2. And LA at number 1.
This list is already feeling pretty lazy. The 3 most populated cities in the country at the top of feel-good summer cities. This feels real corporate so far.
Well, it comes from BetMGM, so not super surprising there. And the sort of categories that they used have to do with sunshine temperature, outdoor summer fun, summer leisure and treat, and then active and healthy living. And so there are different metrics within each of those categories. Chicago did pretty well on all of them, but the thing that we kind of did the best in compared to the top two cities was outdoor summer fun. That was our highest kind of category among the top three. And actually, I think of all the cities they looked at, we were the top in outdoor summer fun.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. No, I am interested because how did they define outdoor? Is it like outside in nature, like you're in green space, or is it just like we outside? So we're just talking like outside. I'm not surprised by this at all. And that's no slight to the great amount of green space, access to the lake and river we have. But when you start looking at some of these other places, I just feel like Denver and Portland are more known for their natural areas.
I was really surprised that we outranked Denver. I was surprised we outranked Portland on this front. So it's an analysis of they're measuring green spaces, beaches, outdoor park and nature trails. And you look at green spaces, one of the metrics is green area per capita. And they actually had missing data for several of the cities that they mentioned, including Portland and Denver, Tampa, also for New York, for that matter. And so those were all just assigned an average value for green area per capita. They also looked at access to waters, number of ocean or lake beaches per capita, which Chicago certainly does rank pretty highly on. We also have a lot of free beaches here. I just saw a TikTok about the North Shore and how you've got to pay for beaches up there. And then they looked at outdoor parks, number of outdoor parks per capita, which Chicago has always ranked pretty highly in, as I believe. And then nature trails, miles of nature trails per 10,000 residents. But they are talking about like outdoor activity, Jacoby, like sort of being out with the water, the grass, the trees, that kind of thing.
Gee, it costs $24 for non-residents to swim at Winnetka beaches? Mm-hmm. Y'all is bugging. It's very underappreciated by me, obviously, because I take it for granted. But so, like, the way Chicago has prioritized not selling off lakefront access to billionaires, 100 millionaires, like the uber wealthy, I will say that's something we got to go ahead and give a pat on the back for. It's not to say that, like, big ass tourist attractions ain't down there and people still feel maybe pushed out a little bit, but like, look how beautiful our lake is. Imagine if most of that was just like people's backyards.
We don't have a huge proliferation of private beaches in Chicago. That's not really a thing here. The other thing that surprised me was, so like I said, they also did like ideal summer temperature, which it looks like as close to 70 was their ideal. And Chicago's average temperature between June to August is just over 73 degrees, which I was surprised by. I would have guessed it was much warmer. But when you look at the lows, like the average lows for June, July, and August, you're looking in like the high 60s.
That is my ideal temperature.
They also voted New York as the best city for ice cream access, but they only measured the amount of ice cream stores within 2 miles of city center per capita, which, first of all, I'm not sure which city are they. I assume they mean Manhattan for New York. I don't like, that seems wild. That seems wild for New York, to be honest. Like, for them to not be counting, are they not counting all the boroughs? Like, I don't know what's happening there. But in Chicago too, as we know, lots of great ice cream shops in the neighborhoods, well beyond 2 miles outside of the city center.
2 miles in a city this big is so disrespectful.
Right?
It's like, I don't even think the best ice cream is within 2 miles of downtown.
I think that's kind of rude for all three cities, personally, all three of the top cities.
It disadvantages the hell out of us, and we still won, but like...
Also, there's just so much good ice cream out.
Oh, so much good ice cream.
In the neighborhoods.
I love me some Richards down on the far south side. That might, Richard Supreme Premium.
That's a good one. That's a good one. I really want some gelato. Oh, gelato would be good.
I want to give a huge thank you to our executive producer, Simone Alisea, for joining me once again to break down the stories so you ain't got to.
Hey, thanks, Jacoby.
Before we get out of here, Please bookmark our website, chicago.citycast.fm. There you can subscribe to our daily newsletter, Hey Chicago. Just like the podcast, it is something you can look forward to every single day, Monday through Friday, bright and early in your inbox, so you can feel more connected to this city. Something you can only get on the podcast, though, some good news. There are a ton of great shows happening this week, including Jazz and Gumbo at Dorian's on Wednesday, and then on Friday, Smino and Samara Sin are going to be live at the Salt Shed. These are a couple shows you do not want to miss. But hey, if there are others that you're interested in and you want to put me on, then reach out, let me know, 773-780-0246. As always, I appreciate you for listening and reading. We're going to be back bright and early tomorrow. We'll talk to you then. Peace.